Welcome to Newshour. Tonight we assess Donald J. Trump's first 100 days since returning to the White House. Well, since re-entering the Oval Office, he pledged to deliver a re-energized republic with executive actions on pipelines, tariffs and border controls. Yet several headline promises, from sweeping tax cuts to the much-vaunted border wall, remain caught in congressional wrangling. Will supporters hail a decisive reset by a leader who makes things happen? Critics, meanwhile, warn of widening deficits, worrying uncertainty, and fraying alliances. We examine what has been achieved and what remains aspirational. Turning to Canada, voters have delivered a striking verdict. Mark Carney has led the Liberals back into government. The campaign overshadowed in its latter stages by one President Trump and his quip suggesting Canada could become the 51st state. That appears to have galvanised nationalist sentiment rather than subduing it. We ask how far cross-border rhetoric may have influenced the outcome and what Carney's leadership could mean for future relations with Washington, from trade to defence and climate cooperation. Stay with us as we survey a continent in political flux, where promises meet reality and unexpected ripples reshape old alliances. First, let's take a look at how the American public have reacted to Trump's first 100 days.
This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before.
U.S. President Donald Trump was elected on the hope he would fight inflation and boost the economy. But as his 100th day in office approaches, Americans are giving him poor marks in both those areas. A Reuters Ipsos poll this week showed that just 37% of Americans approve of Trump's handling of the economy, down from the first days of his presidency, in which he promised to bring about a golden age of America. Trump has kicked off his term with an aggressive economic agenda, sparking trade wars as he slaps tariffs on trading partners and setting off the worst sell-off in U.S. financial markets since the start of the pandemic 5 years ago. Now, 3/4 of the poll respondents said they worried a recession was coming. And more than half of the respondents, including 1 in 4 Republicans, said Trump's moves to shake up the economy are, quote, too erratic. Trump has also rattled markets by intimating he could fire Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, the nation's top official tasked with controlling inflation. But on Tuesday, Trump pulled back on that threat.
I have no intention of firing him.
Trump has also pressured the Fed to lower interest rates, but Powell, like Wall Street economists, has said that Trump's moves to raise tariffs could push inflation higher. To be sure, a large swath of the country still backs Trump, many fervently. But despite his widespread party support, the poll showed that 1 in 3 Republicans said their cost of living was on the wrong track. As one senior fellow at a conservative think tank put it, quote, "Everything that's supposed to be up is down. Everything that's supposed to be down is up."
Now let's head over to Washington, D.C. and hear from our correspondent there, Nick Harper.
As far as 100 days go, Donald Trump's second term has been perhaps the most consequential of any modern US presidency. It's been a whirlwind of executive orders that have upended policy both domestically and internationally. Republicans within his party have loved it. They've cheered a president who they say is finally getting things done. Things like reducing expenditure and waste in government agencies, thanks to cost-cutting measures enacted by the newly created Department of Government Efficiency, headed up by tech billionaire Elon Musk. Republicans say President Trump has got tough on illegal border crossings, held countries to account by implementing tariffs to level the playing field on trade imbalances, and push for peace in the long-running Ukraine war. But on the other side of the aisle, Democrats have looked on dismayed, as Donald Trump has knocked over many of the foundational pillars they argue the US is built on. Things like the rule of law, deporting people without due process, infringing on free speech rights by detaining pro-Palestinian protesters. Democrats argue Trump's rapid remake of America has caused irreparable harm. Perhaps the most disruptive part of the president's 100 days has been tariffs. They've impacted every country, and the pauses, rollbacks and changing rates have created a level of uncertainty that has worried global markets and unnerved US allies. Critics argue Trump's trade policies could create an opening for the US's greatest trade rival, China, as other countries look for alternatives to the US to do business with. Militarily, allies and partners have expressed concern about the president's push for peace in Ukraine, saying that a deal will favour Moscow. While the Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth using Signal to share sensitive military information about airstrikes on the Houthis in Yemen has further undermined trust among allies. Undoubtedly, the breakneck speed of Trump's 100 days has shocked many people. But the White House argues all of the changes will benefit the US, its economy, national security and global standing, even if the full effect is not felt for some time. Nick Harper for A News in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Nick. Nick Harper for us there in Washington. OK, let's delve a bit deeper into this now. I'm delighted to say that we're joined by political analyst Professor Scott Lucas. Scott, great to see you. Thanks for joining us on NewsHour. Well, I think all of us in the media, in political life, can agree that it's not exactly been a passive 100 days for President Trump, has it? Whatever you think of the president, he's certainly been active in the media, active in terms of the number of pieces of legislation that he's attempted to put forward. But what's your assessment of his actual legislative program?
Well, thank you very much, Guy. I have to say you're being polite by just calling it active. We need to go a bit further. And we also need to go beyond saying it's a legislative program. In fact, almost all of what Trump has done has been through executive orders, more than 140 of them in his first 100 days in office. That's as many as Joe Biden had in 4 years. And by many actions which have no legal authority, arguably are unconstitutional, such as the decimation of U.S. agencies by the person who was effectively his unelected co-president, Elon Musk. I need to explain why we need to be more forthright than just saying active.
Yes.
What Trump 2.0 has tried to do is it's tried to gut the U.S. agencies. It's tried to end their programs, fire their staffs, force resignations, reduce them to effectively trying to be loyalist outposts of the White House. You have had the attempt to defy the courts, even the Supreme Court, to carry out certain actions, such as the disappearance of migrants in a foreign prison. You have had the attempt to effectively crush the media, or any media that would dare challenge Trump, by really only rewarding the loyalist and by stigmatizing those who question him as being disloyal and as being un-American. You've had the attempt to control universities, and in a sense almost crush universities, with Harvard just being one example. And you've really had the attempt to pursue, and I know what this word means, to pursue authoritarian rule. This is a very different period than any other presidency, not just because action's being taken, but this action is going beyond the Constitution and effectively trying to break the system where it's only Donald Trump's wish that should be recognized.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So, as you say, action is indisputable. The effect of that action, though, on society will certainly polarize opinion. In terms of those executive actions, those executive orders that you spoke about, which do you feel has had the most significant impact?
Well, I think all of American society is being affected. But I think let's start off by going global and talk about the actions of the tariffs. You have this unilateral action, which is really based it's economically illiterate, if I have to be honest. And Americans will suffer first. They're going to suffer in terms of higher prices. Manufacturers will find it more difficult to make and sell goods. American farmers will find it more difficult to produce their crops. And then, of course, everyone else, including in Azerbaijan or in Ireland, where I am, will suffer from those higher tariffs because they'll disrupt supply chains and because our prices will rise as well. But then if you talk about other actions that are unprecedented, the threat to deport millions of people in the United States, including some migrants who are legally there, without giving them due process of law, that is unprecedented in terms of going beyond the Constitution in terms of what it's doing. The attempt to effectively steal records from government agencies with sensitive information about millions of Americans, that has never been done before. And I think more broadly, just the simple attempt to convert the presidency almost into a de facto monarchy, that is beyond each individual executive order. That's the sum total of what they are trying to achieve.
Yeah, and the sum total, as you mentioned there, Scott, also has been to shift the perception of brand USA, if you like, with other countries abroad, to change the posture that America takes. Just speak to us a little bit about that. Do you feel that that shift is, in some senses, irreversible? How do you think people now see America? Has it changed beyond recognition?
Well, I think it's important to say, first of all, that what Trump says is not irreversible. You know, whether or not we agree with it, the American system hopefully will remain in a place where people will be able to say, if they, take power after Trump and they disagree with it, they can make changes. But I think that gets to the question of what is America now? America is, it's not a perfect society. It's been flawed in many respects. I grew up in a very flawed section of it in the South. But you always had the values that we did stand for freedom. We did stand for democracy. We did stand for the ability of people to get a better way of life, economically or socially. And many people did. Now what you have is, I think in the eyes of many people in the world, an America which no longer, at least in terms of its leadership, even pays lip service to those values, much less abides by them. The very fact that you have a man who's a convicted felon, who is the president, speaks volumes. I think if you look at certain countries, I think if you look at Azerbaijan, they'll look at America and they'll say, well, okay, we can actually benefit from America stepping back from these values. We can pursue transacting with the Trump administration in terms of interest without having to think about human rights or without having to think about democracy. America's going to be much more of what's in it for Trump, what's in it for us. I think the same could be said for other countries as well. But at the end of the day, the international community has rules of the game that we've had since World War II. We have had this sense of trying to pursue international order. And what do you do with an America which no longer, at least through its leaders, abides by the rules of the game and no longer believes in that international order, which, imperfect as it was, is one that did at least limit conflict and provide some sense of progress over the past 80 years.
Just let me ask you this, Scott. Do you think there's any sense in which this shift away from multilateralism, international order, rule of international law, this approach that the Trump administration has taken, do you think any of that is instructive of perhaps the previous approach going too far, in a sense? The assuming a moral superiority, coming into parts of the world and sort of lecturing others, if you like, about how they ought to behave. Is there an element of this that is possibly a necessary correction, albeit you would say going too far?
Well, I think we could have a really, really valuable discussion in terms of that international order I talk about, which is sometimes I think you had the clear era of, instead of engaging with other countries, engaging with other people, you did try to impose your sense of what they should do. I think the Bush administration's invasion of Iraq, I should say, in 2003, a lot of people thought it might be a good thing if Saddam Hussein was out of power. But to do it that way led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people and completely destabilized the region. I think any country trying to impose its values on another is wrong, but any country engaging with another to say, what do we share in terms of our beliefs, in terms of the rights that people have, in terms of what justice means, in terms of what equality means, I think that's a good thing. That's the reason why the United Nations was created after 1945. It's the reason why we have regional organizations, be it the European Union, be it the Organization of American States, be it organizations to which Azerbaijan belongs. My worry about the Trump administration is that it's not actually saying, well, we need to think about these values. We need to think about the idea of morality and interest, in a progressive way. They're just tearing everything up because they have no interest in it. They're simply the question of personal gain. Let's be honest here. And the fact is that Donald Trump's personal gain doesn't necessarily benefit the rest of the more than 7 billion people on the planet.
Finally, Professor, just let me ask you, we've had the first 100 days of Trump. What do you expect to see in the next 100 days? And perhaps very differently, what might you hope to see?
Well, yeah, I think you can tell what my hopes are. My hopes are is that we get to a sense of decency, a sense of tolerance, a sense of respect, and that we get back to the rule of law. But I think what we have is almost a race against time. On the one hand, Donald Trump's not going to change. I mean, Donald Trump is going to give interviews today about how his 100 days have been glorious. America has the best economy in the world. He's the best president ever, because reality is not going to intervene. And he's going to continue this campaign to, if not bend the U.S. system. But the other side of this is, as you noted in your excellent reports, is that a lot of people are becoming very unhappy with this already within the first 100 days. America is facing economic downturn. It is facing issues with inflation, with unemployment. Those issues will be exacerbated by the tariffs. You have 4 major opinion polls this past week that showed Donald Trump had reached the lowest approval rating of any president in modern U.S. history, lower even than he was at in his first term. So the question here is, will Trump break the U.S. system first, or will the reality of what he's doing cause enough people to stand up and say, we really think we don't want to go down this path? I have to tell you that which way that turns out is probably the most important moment in American history since the end of the Civil War in 1865.
Very interesting indeed. Professor Scott Lucas, thank you for joining us. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Okay, to Canada now, where a dramatic election result is reshaping the political landscape and sending a message far beyond its borders. Let's take a listen to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's latest speech.
Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me? And I want to congratulate Pierre Poilievre on a hard-fought, fair, good campaign, his commitment to the country that we both love. Humility underscores the importance of governing as a team in cabinet and in caucus, and working constructively with all parties across Parliament. Of working in partnership with the provinces and the territories, and with Indigenous peoples. America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never. But these are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over. The system of open global trade, anchored by the United States, a system that Canada has relied on since the Second World War, a system that, while not perfect, has helped deliver prosperity for a country for decades, is over. These are tragedies. but it's also our new reality. We are over the shock of the American betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons.
But you're going to take us forward.
We have to look out for ourselves. When I sit down with President Trump, it will be to discuss the future economic and security relationship between two sovereign nations. And it will be with our full knowledge that we have many, many other options than the United States to build prosperity for all Canadians. The point is that we can give ourselves far more than the Americans can ever take away. But even given that, I want to be clear. The coming days and months will be challenging, and they will call for some sacrifices. But we will share those sacrifices by supporting our workers and our businesses.
Okay, joining us now is our very own Canadian in Europe, A-News's Anita Sharma. Anita, great to see you, as always.
Thanks, Guy. Likewise.
Let's get into this then. This 51st state remark, it had tremendous impact, didn't it? Just bring that to life for us.
Absolutely. Guy, you'll recall our last conversation about this when Carney basically dropped his hat into the ring and he said, that's it. I'm going back to Canada and I'm going to take Canada forward, be the leader that the country needs to battle what's happening south of the border. And he won. He made good on that promise, becoming the 24th Prime Minister of Canada. But to your point, what happened south of the border with Trump a few months ago, calling out Canada, which was a huge surprise, right, to Canada and of course the rest of the world. But when he started musing about Canada becoming the 51st state, and in fact, just yesterday, I believe he tweeted that Canada would become a quote unquote cherished 51st state and that tariffs wouldn't be needed if ... Presumably Canada would join the United States. So let's take you back to January when the Conservatives were poised to actually achieve a landslide victory in Canada before Trump started verbally attacking the country. When the attack started coming through, what was once seen as Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, what was once seen as his positive attributes now turned or seemed to be negative attributes. He was seen as Canada's Trump, as someone who would put Canada first, be the nationalist that Canada needs, increase economic ties with the rest of the world, increase jobs, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, though, for Pierre Poilievre, when these attacks started, a lot of Canadians started saying, wait a second, if he's just like Trump, we don't need another Trump, especially what's going on right now with Donald Trump's behavior as the president of the United States. Carney drops his hat in the ring, says, I will be the savior Canada needs, and he won. But it's important to note, Guy, he got a minority government. While the polls were heavily favored towards the Conservatives back in January, once Carney said he would run, the polls shifted dramatically, and I predicted this, that they would show a majority coming through for the Liberals. But guess what? The polls were wrong. He won a minority government, and the Conservatives actually did really well. They picked up another 20 seats. The leader did not win his seat due to, I believe, some domestic strife. There was some internal politics within the city of Ottawa, and it looks like Pierre Poilievre bore the brunt of that. But still, his party scored well with the younger demographic, especially younger men.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Anita. I mean, I remember, as you say, you being sat in this studio when we discussed the how all indicators seem to point to a Conservative win. Years and years of a Liberal government. There was an expectation that people would finally turn their back on that. The popularity dip that Prime Minister Trudeau had, the sense that there would be some contagion there across the party. And yet Mr. Carney has pulled this off. What do you think it says about the character, the personality of the political climate at the moment in Canada? How do we characterize it? How do we define what's going on?
There's so many elements here, Guy. My colleagues and I are still parsing through this significant, very significant election. We know there's an election coming up in Australia as well, and they're watching very closely to see how the people of Canada voted, how they changed their political stripes in the new era of Trump returning to office in the United States. So you ask about Canada. You know, there's so much to unpack there. On the Carney front, I talked about what was seen as a disadvantage or an advantage for Poilievre, which turned into a disadvantage. On Carney's side, before the Trump debacle had started, the back and forth, the 51st state comments, if you will, Carney was seen as just one of those political insiders, right? He was the central bank governor of Canada. Then he went on to be the central bank governor of England. Then he was the UN special envoy for climate and climate action and finance. He was seen as an elitist, an out of touch liberal, if you will, still a liberal that veers more towards the right, a liberal that veers more towards conservative leanings due to his private finance background, but still seen as an insider. Like I said, though, when the Trump debacle really hit the front pages of every newspaper around the world, Canadians understandably got worried, and they thought, you know what, we might need someone with all that experience, that insider experience, someone who can pick up the phone, talk to his allies in England, in Europe, in Asia, and help us, help Canadians battle what's coming down the pipe with respect to the U.S., with respect to what Donald Trump is putting out right now, his rather unsavory comments about Canada.
Yeah, you talk about the battle that's coming, Anita. Let's just talk about that for a moment. In a sense, this is set up to be a battle, a tariff battle, a trade battle between two diametrically opposed opponents, if you like. You've got the as you say, the establishment man, you know, Ivy League background, economist, very much part of the furniture at places like the World Economic Forum and others, versus Donald Trump, the great property salesman, the great, as he would, I guess, put it, the alternative leader, if you like. How do you expect those two individuals to approach this battle?
Well, this is going to be very interesting, right? As I said off the top in our conversation, Guy, he won a minority government. The latest polls right up to the election were showing a majority government. So he didn't win on that front. This is still seen as a big victory, though, for Mark Carney, because he just came in a very short time ago and snatched the victory from the Conservatives. But again, it's worth noting he didn't get that majority government. What does this mean? He will need to, in order to govern, in order to push through legislation and laws in Canada, he will need to seek support from other members of other parties in Canada, in the House of Commons in Ottawa. So is he going to look for support from the Conservatives? Is he going to look to support, rather, from the NDP? That's the Socialist Party of Canada, the New Democratic Party. And interestingly enough, a party that has lost its status, its official party status, because a lot of Canadians, it turns out, who would traditionally vote for the Socialist Party actually went towards the Liberals and also actually went towards the Conservatives. So there's so many stories coming out of this election. It's absolutely astounding. Bottom line, he has to deliver. He's made his commitment. He's even alluded to the fact that mistakes are going to be made. He said, I will make some mistakes. It'll be a very interesting time in the next few months and weeks, but he has to deliver. If Canadians get any whiff of the fact that he cannot stand up to Trump, that he cannot get things done, incidentally, he also promised to open up free trade, not internationally, but domestically. That means from coast to coast to coast, from BC to the north and across to the east in Nova Scotia. There's a lot of traditionally, there's been a lot of bickering, for lack of a better word, between the provinces and territories of Canada. He promises to resolve that so that Canadians can stand together as one united country with the territories and the provinces coming together so that they can tackle Donald Trump, so that they can increase their relationship, strengthen their relationship with other countries as well. If he promises to make good on that by Canada Day, which is June 1st. If he can't make progress on that front, you can bet the Conservatives will be chomping at the bits to take this gentleman back to the polls.
And finally, Anita, let's talk about climate policy, yet another area where the two leaders seem to be very opposed to each other. We know, as you mentioned, that Mr. Carney has a strong track record in working to battle against climate change in various guises. What do you expect the new Prime Minister to do? Because obviously he's got to try and balance the desire to improve the economy with the desire to improve climate policy. How do you expect him to navigate that?
You know, that's a really interesting question. On the one hand, if Trump wasn't a factor, I would say that given his past experience being appointed the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, given his background as a former chair of BAM, as we call it on the street, Brookfield Asset Management, a powerhouse alternative asset company that's got its hands in almost everything, a multi-billion-dollar company at that. Given his vast experience in the private sector, in the public sector as central bank governors for two different countries, I would say that would mean that he would hold climate action policies paramount, dear to his heart. However, I'd also be remiss, Guy, if I didn't mention that with Donald Trump shifting away publicly from anything diversity-oriented, anything that he deems to be unnecessary or frivolous, whether it be climate initiatives, the Paris Accord, diversity hires, a lot of companies, whether it's that they also internally didn't believe in those initiatives or want to appease Donald Trump, many of these companies are starting to back away from such policies. So how will Mark Carney navigate that current climate? That remains to be seen.
Yeah, very interesting point to end on. Anita, thank you as always for joining us. A News' Anita Sharma there, joining us from the Netherlands. And that does bring us to the end of tonight's NewsHour as President Trump presses forward then amid unfinished business and Prime Minister Carney faces a fractured mandate. The path ahead for North America is anything but certain. We'll continue to follow every development right here. That's all tonight from NewsHour, from all of us on the team here in Baku. Goodbye for now.